Welcome to Orr Street Studios. I'm John Fennell. I'm an artist in residence here for the past 3 or 4 years. And I'm going to give you a little tour of both Orr Street. This is the hallway leading into my studio. And we're allowed to put some of our paintings up on the hallway here as people walk through. This shows a little bit of the history of my work. I started out as a landscape painter, primarily a plein air painter. I would sit outside, and I still sit outside all the time. A lot of these are local. This is from Rocheport on the Missouri River. This is actually from Mexico. It was in the Yucatan that I painted this. Some of these are from plein air competitions that I've worked on. This was at Finger Lakes, which is in Missouri, and the snow was melting, the ice was melting, and I love the feeling of the color on the melting ice, the melting snow, and the variety of works that came through here, the colors, the form and the shape of all of these things. So I'm going to take you a little bit further in. This is the entryway to my studio. These are some recent paintings that I did. These are acrylic paintings, both of them. This is called Gemstone, and this is called Black on White Winter. And it started out as a winter painting, but it became more than just winter. It became this kind of form that I like to see in the patterns that I'd like to see in some of my abstract work. So I'm going to bring you into my studio now. This is the beginning of my studio, and I'll show you a little bit more here of the work of both the landscapes and the abstractions that I do. This is one of the larger larger landscapes that I do. And as I mentioned, I started out as a plein air painter, but these large paintings I paint generally in the studio from ideas and sketches that I find in nature. This happens to be from Mexico, and we were down there in the wintertime, and I just loved not so much the sunset, but what happened after the sunset. And it was exciting to me to kind of find the colors and the patterns in the landscape. But right next to it, what you'll see here are some abstract works. This particular work is a representative of the kind of patterned color work that I've been doing. These ideas come from small sketches that I do in nature, mostly in urban settings, sometimes in natural settings. But I put them together into this kind of almost hallucinogenic pattern that gives me the sense of music. Music has been a very large influence on my work, both jazz and classical music. And I find that music has the same kind of elements, like rhythm, like form, like color. If you listen to jazz or listen to classical music, you can hear these forms in the colors. And this is what I try to reflect in a piece like this. As we go on, these are painting that I just completed in the last few weeks. So you see I switch off from both the abstract work into more natural work. There's a Katy Trail that passes by our house, and I walk it almost every single day. And so what you see here are ideas that I pick up along the trail, and I do sketches and I do some photographs, and I bring them into the studio and try to find a composition. This was in the fall, or the early fall, and this one was also in the early fall, where these flowers come up, and I find lots of inspiration for color and form in nature, and that color and form in nature feeds these small abstractions. All of these were painted, these smaller ones right here, like a painting like this, was painted in Mexico. My wife's mother lives in Mexico, and we go to visit her. And while I'm there, I look for ideas. This idea came from a gas station. There was color in the gas station. I didn't want to show the gas station itself, but I wanted to show the color of it. And so you see these forms come from my imagination or come from what I experienced outside in living. I do small works because I can carry them these are on paper that I mounted on board, and I can carry this materials with me on my trips. So these are representative of these ones that I've painted while I've been traveling. These small little sketches right here are also sketches that I did. These are in Hong Kong, both of these. They're small little paintings that I did on the marina there. It's very, very active area when you're down by the boats. And I try to find, I look at the details, and then I try to find the patterns that I see in this kind of urban nature that sits on the water in Hong Kong. I want to bring you back to a different kind of landscape. These are cityscapes. I've done a lot of paintings sitting on the street corners in cities. When I started painting, actually, when I started abstract work, what influenced me were the patterns and the color that I saw in the streets. But instead of trying to paint something realistically, what I saw, I wanted to experience what I felt. What I felt was sitting there, the action on the streets, or the feeling of two people meeting on the street at a bus stop. And what was the meaning of their meeting? And that's the title of this particular work, The Meeting. And the Missouri Arts Council used this and when they named me and 3 other artists as Artists of the Month for June. They particularly thought this was an interesting example of my work. I want to bring you over to some paintings, some first abstract paintings that I did when I was trying to explore. I'm a restless person, and I want to know everything about art. And so instead of just painting landscapes all the time, I started exploring what form meant in painting, the abstract work, the color, and to see what I could do with it. So there's some paintings up here, up on the high wall there. This was part of a series called The Geometry of Light. And in the geometry of light, what I was trying to do was harmonize intense colors. And I used the geometric form to be able to do that. I would put down a shape, and then I would put down another shape over it. And so all of these the colors were discovered as I put different colors over the other ones to get these forms together. This was part of a series of maybe 15 paintings, and these are the 3 that are left of that exhibit, the geometry of light. So it led me to all of the abstractions that you'll see in this exhibit here. My personal studio space is what I also use it. I think of it both as a studio space and as a gallery. These particular paintings we're back to nature now. I was looking up close at nature here, not so much as the vistas of nature, but of details. This is a huckleberry tree in fall. And instead of looking at the tree, I looked at the leaves and the berries and the greens behind the leaves and berries to create this mostly pattern painting, but from nature. I was walking on the Katy Trail and I looked below me, and this struck me as a whole world in itself. There were these weeds and these forms and all this life happening right below my feet. And so I wanted to be able to capture this. And so I worked on this for a long time, trying to get the actual composition right. And so what you see here are these weeds in the fall and all of the background, the darker background between it. And it's a world in itself. This particular one is, I was walking in the field, and it was a field of fall grasses, just the wild grasses that grow. And how do you make a composition of this? You find a way to look at the patterns, to look at the colors, and then to highlight certain areas here, these light greens, these light yellows that come forward, and the medium tones that recede a little bit, and then these dark tones which frame the entire painting. So it's basically an abstract painting, but it's from nature. I wanted to go back to my experience in Hong Kong. My son lives there, and in Hong Kong, the city is so vibrant. There are so many details, and the buildings are just magnificent. And I did these little sketches all the time, just of buildings, of little details that I saw. And what interested me was, could I put these together into a singular painting? So some of these were like little details from a building. They were details from street signs. They were other forms that I just saw that were beautiful abstract forms. And so I started drawing these on this particular painting, and I would put one down. This was maybe some kind of traffic sign of some kind that I abstracted into this circle. These were small like rhythms that I saw in buildings or somewhere else in the city. And I brought them all together with 4 primary colors: these reds, these oranges, these ochres, these burgundy colors, and these blues, and touched them off with a little bit of black to hold the forms together. And people have, I titled it Tribal Rhythms because it seems to have an African feeling to it. People walk into my studio and they say, well, this looks like an African tapestry or cloth. And I said, I know African painting, but I've not really been that interested in it to really kind of think about how to paint it. But this one just emerged in some ways. And I think it emerged basically from my interest in color and form and how they come together into a whole. But this I painted in the studio as I painted this in the studio. When I was in Hong Kong, the night lights really struck me. As you're walking down the street, you see the neon lights on all the buildings, and they light up the buildings there. And I started doing pattern drawings from some of the things that I saw on the buildings. So you see this reflection of neon lights and the buildings and the kind of the structural elements of those buildings that make Hong Kong such a dynamic city. So this one I painted in the studio from a series of 4 sketches that I did walking around at night. So I'm going to bring you back to a different kind of painting. This painting is titled Longing Autumn, and I painted it for an exhibit at Montminy Gallery here in Columbia. Montminy is a part of the Boone County History and Culture Center, and we wanted some larger paintings for that exhibit. And I was thinking about fall, and there's something about fall that always attracts me in a big way. The feeling of longing, basically, because autumn is a time of change. Things are happening, the landscape is changing, and you feel a kind of a sense of sadness in some ways in autumn, at least I do, and yet it's also beautiful. And the colors here reflect that feeling that I often have in autumn. But the larger elements of this painting, this luminous form, it's not quite a triangle, not quite a parallelogram, but it's a dominant form of the painting. And it sits there, and then these elements, there's a layering of paint here. I didn't know where I was going with this, except it took me weeks to kind of figure out. I just kept working on it, not knowing exactly how I was going to solve the problem. But I felt after I put in these particular forms, layering them over this dominant form, that I began to feel that it was coming together into a whole. So again, it's called Longing Autumn. Now I'm going to bring you into some different kinds of painting. Once in a while, I feel like color is not the answer, and I wanted to simplify the work in a way that only had form and black and white. And so these 2 paintings reflect my interest in doing this. And they're 2 very different paintings. We talked a little bit about the musical forms. This one has the action of musical forms. There's lines coming through. You can feel the rhythms of it. You can feel the clatter, even the sound of maybe drums or something else in it. While this particular painting is quieter, and it's called Dreaming. And I think it reflects the quietness when you're laying down and you're about to fall asleep, and all of those forms kind of have a softness to them. So this is musical clang, this is quiet rhythms that you see here in these particular forms. Back to Hong Kong now. What you're seeing here in this particular painting, which is called Pulse of the Streets. I combined a lot of the sketches that I did into this large painting, and I was trying to get at the action of how the streets feel in Hong Kong, where there's so much action, so much pulse. And so one of my colleagues, artist colleagues, came in and she said, you know, this painting kind of pulses. And I said, look at the title of this, Pulse of the Streets. And she said, well, you got it. And I think that it does reflect this kind of rhythm and excitement that you see on the streets of Hong Kong, no matter what time of the day or night. And it was trying to get at that experience of walking around in the streets. And so I did it with these colors, these kind of yellows and these reds and these blacks and these maroons that gave you this sense of what I experienced while I was walking on the streets there. I'm going to bring you now to a few more. I had the chance to be able to work in a small studio there. It was a cooperative studio in Hong Kong, and I was trying to reflect what I was experiencing in Hong Kong. So these three paintings right here are pieces that were hanging in a gallery in Hong Kong, and I brought them back here. One of them actually was bought by a couple who wanted to put it in their music room. And you can see the musical feelings of them. This one is called Organic Undercurrents, because there's an undercurrent of form and rhythm in all of the things that I was experiencing there. And I tried to suggest that in there. I didn't know where the painting was going until I put this purple down at one point, and this purple became the unifier of all of those oranges and reds. And they kind of, once I put the purple down, I felt like, okay, I think this is going to be the solution to the painting. This particular painting is also another night painting, where I'm looking at the forms of the buildings there and trying to suggest the neon feeling of night in a place like Hong Kong. This one is about almost the chaos, but the ordered chaos of Hong Kong, where I painted these orange and yellow and green forms first. And then I looked at the painting for a long time and I didn't know where it was going. And one day I came into the studio and drew a black square and another black square and another black square. And then I connected all of the squares with triangles. And then I thought, okay, it needs something more. And then I outlined them in this blue. So you get this layering of things that happen in a city where in front of you, you see these elements, and then behind you, you see more elements. And it has this kind of almost really strong kind of rhythm forms that you see in nature, that you see in a city image. And I felt like, I think I got that feeling in this particular painting. Down here, some of these are also reflective of the work that I've been doing. This is a reflection of the water, the sea, and how things happen, these waves that go on. It's called the deep end, and so you can see the layers of color in the ocean, and then these forms kind of come through it. They're not quite fish, but the colors and the form reflect sometimes looking at the water. I was walking down the street one day in the summertime, and I looked up and I saw this cloud, me as so beautiful. I thought, I did some sketches right away, and I did some photographs. And I came back to the studio and I thought to myself, can I make a single painting, a painting of a single cloud? And so that was my challenge, to try to see if I could find the beauty that I experienced in nature with paint. And so I laid out all of the sketches that I did, and I laid out the photographs, and I tried to find a composition that would work. Then the next challenge was color. What color did I experience? What color did I feel? And so I did this layering of paint, starting out with a warm color, and then build the form of the clouds, and then the subtleties of the nuances of how the colors came together into this. So you see these very soothing kind of blues and grays against the white, but there's no pure white in this cloud, or in any cloud when you start looking at them. So I felt it was pretty successful in trying to get that feeling that I experienced when I was walking down the street. Opposite this, by the way, is a painting like this. If you're a biker or you're familiar with people who bike, on the streets of most cities is a graphic that is created by the government to show bike lanes. And this particular bike lane with these triangular forms is almost on every street in America if you have bike lanes. And I wanted to celebrate that idea of it, but also give you the sense of what bikers experience, the rhythm, the colors that they pass through. So this has a musical connotation in this particular too that I associated with biking. It was in an exhibit about biking actually here in Columbia, and I felt like it was representative of the kind of feelings, the experience that a lot of bikers have. I'm going to bring you now a little bit further down here, and I'm going to talk about the difficulty of painting sometimes and what we experience as painters. This is a painting I started in spring, and it was a kind of a celebration of spring coming, and I think I titled it "This Coming of Spring." But I put it up here. It's not quite finished, and I look at it oftentimes, and I think it needs something more, but I don't really know what it needs yet. And sometimes, like putting it up here and just letting it sit, letting it hibernate for a while, I may find an answer. As I did with this particular painting, I found this painting, and I did these forms. You can see these intense dark blues and greens and reds, and I liked what was happening in those forms. It had this ochre, kind of dark ochre background to it, but then I let it set for a while because I just didn't know what it was or what I needed to do with it. One day I came into the studio and I painted a yellow line on it, and then I painted another one, and then I painted smaller yellow lines, and then I painted other ones, and it came into this pattern on the background. So these forms emerged, and then these forms recede, but yet they all kind of harmonize together. And then I added these red colors to get the harmony that this dominant color had with the painting. I'm not sure what it means, except that it has always this rhythm and this sense of musicality that I'm looking for in paintings. But I wanted to give you another sense. I'm going to pick up this painting. This was a painting at the Columbia Art League here in town, and they had, for years, they were doing this particular show, and they would give painters a piece of writing, either a poem or a prose poem, and then we would have to interpret it. And so the poem that I was given, it was a piece about 3 people looking up at the stars at night in Finland. And you would see these people laying on the ground on their sleeping bags or in their chairs and looking up at the stars. And this inspired me to get this feeling, not so much of an exact replication of it, but the feeling of what it looks like to look at the stars, and how the blues kind of form with the lights that kind of shine through. And so this was, they hung the painting next to the prose poem. and this was part of maybe 20 other paintings and poems or prose poems in a gallery called Interpretations, and that was what they the writers were also given a painting, and paired next to the painting that I gave a writer, they would interpret this. I don't have that particular one, but this is the one that a piece of writing that was sent to me. So we're coming to the end of the tour of my studio gallery, and what you're seeing here are some of the reflections of posters from the exhibits that I've had here. This was an exhibit at Orr Street where I showed my work in nature with Laura Pintel and me, and we were doing, this was a painting of a close-up of nature, and Laura does a lot of nature paintings of birds. This was an exhibit at William Woods College when I did a whole show of a combination of both abstract work, city images, and natural landscapes. This was the geometry of light and color. I've explained a little bit of my work on geometry and how color and light became an inspiration for me for all those works. And some of the awards that I've been given over the years. This was the Mayor's Award at the summer show that the Columbia Art League does outside. And some of these are, different kinds of awards that I've had over the years. Well, I wanted to thank you for taking this tour with me. It means a lot that you are taking the time to view my work. I've enjoyed this tremendously, and I hope you have too. I'm in love with the idea of painting. It gives me life, it gives me excitement. I can't say enough about what it has done for my own particular life here. And so I continue to paint. No matter what, I find myself in this gallery all the time. And hopefully, if you're in Columbia, you'll come and visit me sometime. I really appreciate that. Thank you.